Welcome, dear listeners, to the latest episode of What Matters Water TV and Podcast, where we're about to embark on a thrilling journey into the heart of innovation and ingenuity. Today, we're stepping into the future of water supply, and believe us when we say it's one you're not going to want to miss. Now, picture this: the Southern California region grappling with the harsh realities of a changing climate, where rain and snow patterns are shifting, leaving us to rethink where and how we get, store, and use water. Now imagine a solution that seems like it's straight out of science fiction, a solution so audacious that it might just change the way we're thinking about water forever. That's right, we're diving headfirst into the world of desalination, where seawater becomes drinking water and where the water needs of Southern California meet cutting-edge technology. I'm Charlie Wilson, your guide on this journey today, and we're joined by a team of experts and pioneers who are transforming the very essence of our water supply. From coastlines to arid inland regions, desalination projects are popping up like never before. But how do they work? What's the environmental impact? And how can they really quench California's thirst during those dry times? Joining us today to answer these questions are four distinguished guests, each at the helm of a water agency contributing to this critical conversation. We have Dan Denham, the General Manager of the San Diego County Water Authority; Joe Moed, General Manager of the Eastern Municipal Water District; David Peterson, the General Manager of Los Virgenes Municipal Water District; and Rick Shintaku, the General Manager of the South Coast Water District. So let's buckle up and prepare to be amazed, because the future of water starts now, right here on What Matters Water TV and Podcast. Well, welcome everybody to What Matters Water TV and Podcast. And hey, thanks Rick, David, Dan, and Joe for joining us for what is going to be a really entertaining and I think an important conversation for us to have. And so it's like being super Captain Obvious today, and I apologize ahead of time for it, but I got to start with addressing this question that, so often comes up. We're sitting in California, we're on the edge of a very big body of water, and why aren't we just talking about going to the ocean? Doesn't that just solve all of our problems? And I'm going to open it and say, hey, David, you kind of sort of see these questions on sort of that global scale and some of the difficulties sort of your agency's been through, but why aren't we just going to the ocean for this simple answer?
Thanks, Charlie. Well, that's a good question, and I think you're not the only one that has that question. We at Los Virgenes, during the drought, we were faced with that same question. And, we were and are one of the metropolitan member agencies in the State Water Project dependent areas. And we felt the impact of drought like probably no other agency in Southern California. There were two reasons for that. One, our location in the metropolitan service area, where we're challenged in that we receive the majority of our supply from the State Water Project, and the fact that we don't have local water. In the height of the drought, when some of the water restrictions were coming down, and this was in June of last year, we did what we thought was the right public policy measure, and we held a town hall, and we shared the situation we were faced with our customers. And we had an overwhelming response. We had 1,400 people join us in a Zoom call. And, just for perspective, we're an agency of 20,000 customers. So that's a big percentage of our customers. And many of them had exactly the question you asked. Why, when we're so close to the Pacific Ocean, why do we not go to the ocean, desalinate ocean water, and supply it to our customers? And there were certainly challenges that we shared with doing that. But I think what I took away is the customers expect us to be thinking big and to be thinking long-term, and that ocean desalination is something that they would like to see us looking at for the future to be more reliable and help to reduce the impacts of future drought. And so that's part of why we're doing it right now.
Well, Dan, I'm going to come to you then, because you've had this front row seat, and you actually, as an agency, went out and put in a very large ocean desal plant. In fact, you now operate one of the largest ocean desal plants in the United States. But I know it didn't happen overnight. And tell us a little bit about the decision-making process. Why did San Diego go down that particular path? And then, what were the challenges with that? What kind of lessons can you sort of share with the group?
Yeah, Charlie, it definitely did not happen overnight. In fact, it took more than 10 years. And during that time period, there were a lot of different iterations to the physical design of the plant itself. The agencies that were initially slated to be part of it, which in fact, in the very early stages, this was not a regional water authority project. It was a project comprised of multiple off-takers. But during that long 10-year process, which took a lot of political will from our board of directors and project stakeholders, and let's not forget the ratepayers that actually paid for the project. But I think that the results sort of speak for themselves. The Carlsbad plant represents about 10% of the San Diego region's water supply. It's locally controlled. It's drought resilient, except when there's an algae bloom, and that doesn't happen very often. But it's not a supply that's dependent on rainfall or snowpack, and it's becoming a very consistent source of supply. It is a consistent, reliable source of supply, and especially in the context of a hotter and drier future due to climate change. I think as David alluded to, 2023, the beginning of 2023, we were in an entirely different world, and having a plant that sort of is ready, available, and drought proof, it served the San Diego region well. It's helped us stave off water supply shortages, not just during this past drought, but prior droughts, dating back to 2007, just before the plant was in operation. But this is one tool in the toolbox, and it's helped us during extended periods of drought.
Well, Rick, I mean, you have a different concept. That same company that Dan had worked with to build the Carlsbad plant did not succeed in a very, 15, 16 plus years up in Huntington Beach. But you've looked at a different kind of plant, a smaller plant, but a different technology. Share with us a little bit about what South Coast is looking at, and what has changed maybe from what you would consider, or my terminology again, sort of the traditional ocean desal, where you directly bring water in from the ocean, desalt it, and then put it, the brine back out in the ocean.
All right, thanks, Charlie. I appreciate the question. As you can tell from my Aloha shirt, or you may be able to tell, I was born and raised in Hawaii, and being born and raised in Hawaii means you're born and raised with the environmental stewardship ethic, and so as we moved into this Doheny Ocean Desal project, it was a natural fit for me to consider that and to work with the environmental and the regulatory community to make sure we made the right choices along the way. And as much as I'd like to take the credit for us being permitted, going through our major permits this last year, the credit is due to the board's decision to go with 1, slant wells, and 2, commingling our salt brine in an existing wastewater outfall. So the slant wells I'll cover first. That's a preferred intake method by our environmental community and our regulators. It's fully submerged. It's at approximately a 10-degree angle from the surface, approximately 1,000 feet long. There is no marine life harm with this method. And our first phase of the project will be 5 million gallons per day and will consist of roughly 4 or 5 slant wells at the Doheny State Campgrounds. Number 2, the commingled brine is also preferred by the environmental and regulatory community. This brine, so to put it in rough terms, we're going to pull in 10 million gallons per day. 5 million gallons of that will be screened out by reverse osmosis for the product drinking water. 5 million gallons per day is brine discharged, commingled in an existing wastewater outfall from the J.B. Latham wastewater treatment plant. And this provides the proper buoyancy when you commingle and mix this to meet the California Ocean Water Plan amendment. This method also incentivizes recycling of water. I've been asked this question quite a bit. If we were to recycle so much upstream that we have no recycled water flow in the wastewater outfall, will you still meet that amendment? And the answer is yes, we'll still meet that. What we would do is pump additional ocean water and commingle that with the brine. And we have proof that it will, through the modeling, the state modeling exercise, that it would meet the ocean plan amendment. And by the way, the outfall from the JB Latham treatment plant actually crosses our site. So we don't have additional infrastructure expenses of hooking up directly into that outfall line. Thank you, Charlie.
Well, and I guess as we're sort of going down that technological progression, we sort of started with Dan. They got the big sort of, call it traditional. Rick, I love the slant well thing's a different way to kind of get at it, where the environmental community is not as opposed and actually has supported kind of your concept. But Dave, I saw something at Las Virgenes. You guys actually just signed an agreement to try an entirely, radically different kind of technology. Now, explain what that is, and are you looking to go to production, or are these test units, or exactly what is it that your agreement looks like with this Blue Water Farm pilot?
Sure. We signed a partnership with a company called Natural Ocean Well, and this was about a month ago in mid-August. It's a pretty forward-looking technology. It's very interesting, but it's relatively new, and there is not an operating facility that's making water using this technology yet, but there will be soon. It's being called a blue water farm, or that's the concept, the blue referring to the color of the ocean. And what it is modular technology for subsea desalination. And so when I say subsea, we're talking about deep ocean desalination, so about 400 meters below the ocean surface. So this is pretty deep, and several miles offshore. It's a system that would harvest fresh water from the aphotic zone of the ocean. So the aphotic zone is the part of the ocean where very little sunlight reaches, like less than 1% of the sunlight. And so it's very cold there, and there's very little sea life in the aphotic zone. And that's one of the benefits of this technology. The other is the system uses and harnesses the hydrostatic pressure of the column of ocean water above it, and it uses that as the driving pressure across the membrane and to purify the water. And then the water, if you will, is drawn off the other side of the membrane and then ultimately pumped back to the shore. Initial testing that's been done shows that it uses up to 40% less energy than conventional seawater desalination. And that's one of the real benefits there. I think when you opened, I didn't completely answer your question. You said, well, why are we not doing more ocean desal? And I would say probably some of the points of criticism are the energy usage and the effect it has on our climate and climate change, and that you kind of have this vicious cycle where you're contributing to, greenhouse gas emissions, which is driving climate change and then worsening our problems in managing and challenges in managing water. So having a lower energy profile is really helpful. There's other environmental benefits. I mentioned not having a lot of sea life in that zone of the ocean. The system has also what is called a life-safe intake, and it's a proprietary intake system that minimizes any potential for entrapment or entrainment of any sea life that is down there. It doesn't use chemicals, so there is no chemical treatment at all. And then it eliminates the need for an onshore plant. And, putting a treatment plant on the coast can be a challenge. So those are kind of the key elements. Like I said, it does require more testing. It's not ready for full production commercialization. And part of the partnership is really for us to help as a public agency to do that testing in our environment and looking at how does RO treatment work when you don't have chemical pre-treatment. And that's really the nature of our test in our reservoir that we will be doing. And of course, our reservoir is not salt water. So you might ask, well, how is that going to inform seawater desalination? And the answer is, well, it's really not going to be demonstrating the seawater treatment portion. It's really going to be looking at the fouling potential of a membrane that doesn't have the benefit of a pretreatment system like chemicals.
All right. Now, if everybody followed that, I'm getting this. Aphotic. We're getting new vocabulary today. It's a new word, so we're going to have to add to it. Well. So what you think of as ocean desal may not be what's in our future. But then I also then got to go to Joe. Like, okay, you're in the Inland Empire, in the Eastern Municipal Water District, and you're the furthest from the coast. And I assume, Joe, you're not just laying a pipe to the coast and pulling stuff in from Rick over in Dana Point. There's a role for desalinating water, even out in the inland communities that I know you've had some success with. Tell me a little bit about this issue of groundwater and brackish recovery, and how is that similar? How is it dissimilar from what these guys are talking about on the coast?
Sure, thanks, Charlie. And there are a lot of similar aspects to it. So just to maybe go back to the origins of our program, back in the late 90s, we started planning for our brackish groundwater desal program. And we saw an opportunity because part of our groundwater basin historically has been brackish. And the fact that water is not used for even agricultural purposes. So we saw an untapped resource. So we started the planning effort, and in 2001, we commissioned our first desalter. And that was followed in a few years. In 2005, we were able to decommission our second desalter. That brought production up to 8 million gallons per day of drinking water. And then last year, we commissioned our third treatment plant, the Paris desalter. And today, we're producing somewhere on the order of 14 million gallons per day of potable water. That water serves disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities in the communities of Quail Valley and Menifee. But to your point, the technology is very similar. It is reverse osmosis technology. There is a brine waste product. The challenge we have is we're about 70 miles away from the Pacific Ocean, but there is, fortunately, the Inland Empire brine line. And we are a member of the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, so we do minimize the amount of brine. We go through a recovery process, but ultimately that brine does make its way all the way down to the Pacific Ocean. Today, we have a network of 15 brackish groundwater wells, and the pipeline network to collect that water and convey it to the centralized treatment facilities. The benefits of the program are really multifold. One is it's a local resource, drought resilient local resource. But the way we've engineered the program, the way we've located the wells, it actually creates a hydraulic barrier so that the salt water does not intrude into high quality adjacent groundwater aquifers. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a benefit to disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. So there's just a number of benefits. We're looking to continue to expand the program. We have multiple partners, not only regional, but statewide and federal partners to help us advance the program.
Well, let me kind of shift then a little bit to the larger public policy question, because we've all had a lot of conversation. I'm not sure if those who are listening or watching it today fully get all the nuances, but since Governor Newsom put together his water resiliency portfolio, what was a bit shocking in that, among the various options, the governor actually in his group said, you know what, this desalination piece should be part of our portfolio going forward. And when you take into context that today we're utilizing some 50-60% of our water comes from either the Colorado River or from the Sacramento Bay Delta, the combination of the two. And I remember when we were talking about things like, the fixing the California Delta, if you were to, quote, solve the supply issue, you could go to the ocean and desalt. But at that point, you were talking about, Dan, plants about the size of what you have in Carlsbad at 50 million gallons a day, but you'd have to locate one of those plants about every 6 miles from Ventura all the way to the Mexican border. Not very practical. From your perspective and the different technologies each of you are sort of either testing or looking to employ or are employing. Where do you believe the issue of desalination fits into this larger portfolio as we move forward with the state, we move forward with metropolitan, we move forward with trying to meet those very stringent but very lofty goals within that water resiliency portfolio? Dan, I'm going to start with you because you sort of jumped on this early. This may sort of speak a little bit to some of the, both the business case and the political case as to why in San Diego your board voted to move forward on such a big project initially.
Well, I think the short answer is we didn't have much of a choice, but I do think today, the technology and the resources are in place to support significant expansion of seawater desal. I think the primary challenge is the interface with the environment, both the marine life and in terms of carbon emissions. It may not be intuitive, but I will say that cost is not necessarily the issue. And I say that because I truly believe that all of the cheap water is gone. So the unit price that we're talking about for seawater desal or reuse, it's all relatively the same. And I think, if you continue to unpack that a little bit, what that comes down to is affordability of this supply. At least in San Diego, the majority of the cost of our plant is attributed to electricity. What does it take to power the plant? It still is the most technologically advanced plant in North America. And prior to coming online, we completed a greenhouse gas reduction plan, and we prepared measures that ensured that plant operations would be net carbon neutral. So the plant does use an energy recovery system that it reduces the electricity need to desalinate the water by about 45%. There are other sort of one-offs that help knock down the price, like purchasing carbon offsets. But in terms of expansion, like I said, I believe the technology's there. It's simply a matter of affordability and the cost.
So Rick, let me characterize it maybe a little bit different for you, because you got a coastal permit when, as I said, the plant a little further up the road in Huntington Beach was denied. Politically, from a public policy standpoint, what really were the differentials? What was the difference maker for you versus what they were trying to do in Huntington Beach?
Thanks, Charlie. I've received this question quite a bit actually last year, and what I like to say is there's different needs in every region, and I certainly am not going to be critical of the need that they had in that northern Orange County region, but I can tell you for South Orange County, the need is very apparent. We're all roughly 90% dependent on imported water from metropolitan down here, and we do not have a robust groundwater basin as well. In fact, we have a small, what's classified as a subterranean stream along the San Juan Creek, orders of magnitude smaller than the North Orange County basin. So for us, it's very simplistic. We're 90% dependent for our drinking water supply. For example, South Coast Water District is looking at roughly 2 MGD of the 5 MGD project desal. That would offset our need to 50% roughly from metropolitan, and that's conservable. We can do that. We can't conserve 90% in an emergency, but we can certainly conserve 50%. From a regional aspect, I think the future is recycling and conservation is always going to be first. So we're going to squeeze that sponge. DPR is in front of us too. We're going to squeeze that sponge. There's still going to be the need, in my opinion, for ocean water desalination. And if you do it in the right place that has the right need, it's a good project. And it can also be utilized as a potential paper transfer for inland areas that are really dependent on the Colorado River and others. I'm just going to touch lastly on energy. It is an energy intensive process. South Coast Water District is fortunate enough to own land north. Well, we own the 11 acres that the 5 MGD desal project will be sited on. We also own land north of that, and we've committed to utilizing 5 acres for rooftop solar, where we can lease the ground for car dealerships, et cetera, put up rooftop solar, and that could offset our overall energy need for the first phase of the project by roughly 30%. Thanks, Charlie.
All right, David, you sort of talked about it with your new technology. Obviously, there's advantages of proving a new technology that doesn't have the traditional environmental questions. And you also said it kind of addresses that issue about energy as well. But what kind of conversation have you had with regulators or with the state as to where a project like yours fits into this overall matrix and the portfolio that the governor and the state has outlined?
So that has actually been a bit of a challenge because the current framework doesn't really recognize emerging technologies like this one. And so that's been an item that we've tried to really elevate. We were happy to see that seawater desal was included in the governor's portfolio. As Dan said, we think it's appropriate, and we think that it has a place in California's water supply mix. And for our district in particular, we share the challenge that Rick does. I lack groundwater. If I had one water wish, it would be to have groundwater, and I would take even contaminated groundwater, but we don't have it. And so looking long-term, we think desalination is going to be important. We did review the state's report that they put out on siting and streamlining for these kinds of projects. We were a bit disappointed that we didn't see acknowledgement of some of the emerging technologies like offshore desal, and it comes in different varieties. What Ocean Well is doing is one form with the deep ocean technology, but there's floating technologies and others. And, we really ought to be embracing innovation in the space. We've got to be thinking ahead to the future, that the future may not look the same as what we see today, and prepare for it and make space for that. So we did comment, like some of the others on the report, asked that an open mind, be maintained and keep a place for innovation in the space. And we're hopeful that that will happen looking forward. With us locally here, our immediate focus is on water recycling. That has been what our agency is known for, and we are implementing a potable reuse project. And so that is also why we are able to take a little more time and look at a technology that's a little more forward-looking and spend the time to test it and to learn and inform the process, so that when we are ready to implement, that we'll have the knowledge and the informed basis to do that.
Well, Joe, I mean, not to mince words, but for those who are not, water wonks and deeply embedded in these public policy debates, it strikes me that what Dave just described, kind of what you're doing with the groundwater basin, really is a form of recycling, isn't it? You're just taking what is a naturally occurring resource, and you're putting it to its, treating it to at an appropriate level to its best and highest use, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it also complements our recycled water program because it offsets the salt loading from our recycled water program. But I did want to go back. Rick discussed the proposed Doheny Ocean Desal. We are one of the inlet agencies that are currently working with Rick on potentially participating in the Doheny Ocean Desal. And frankly, that's led to a lot of incredible conversations that involve Metropolitan and others about a framework for non-adjacent Met agencies to exchange local water supply resources. So I think it's a good effort by Metropolitan and member agencies to find creative solutions. In Riverside, specifically in Western Riverside, we are the fastest growing region in the entire state. So for us, when we talk about climate adaptation, when we talk about investing in resources to make sure we secure our water supply future, we're not just looking at our local area, our local region. We're also looking outside of our region. We're looking at ways that we can partner with South Coast and frankly others to see how we can make sure that we can continue to accommodate the growth we're seeing.
Well, probably a politically volatile question for all of you then. If that's the case, why aren't we looking at this, say, from a more larger regional perspective, say at the metropolitan level, where deals then would come theoretically between, say, Las Vegas and Southern Nevada and Metropolitan and then member agencies? Or is what you guys are all looking at as individual agency projects and then looking within the family for the matrix and contract relationships? Is that an issue for you, or do you see that also evolving going forward as we do these longer term integrated resource planning and strategic planning for the region?
Well, maybe Charlie, I'll start it off, and then I'm sure the others would want to comment. But I think you mentioned Nevada. I think SNWA's participation in Pure Water is a good start, and I think it's those kinds of partnerships that we need, not only across the region but across the entire West. But we do feel strongly that ocean desalination needs to be part of our future. Just like Dave mentioned, we also reviewed the draft seawater siting and streamlining report. What we saw, though, in the report and our comments to the State Water Resource Control Board were that we saw a predisposition for small boutique type of ocean desal facilities. And although that's still important, and we very much support that, we also believe there's a need long-term for larger centralized ocean desalination. And I hope at some point we are going to get more partnerships across the entire region. I think we absolutely need it.
Well, I'm probably biased in this, having spent a long time working for the Southern California Edison Company and the one company running a desal unit out in Catalina Island for about 25 years now. But that is clearly old technology running off a diesel generator. Rick, I guess from your perspective, have you had an easier time with the regulators, or have you seen the same kind of concern that some of these projects can generate from constituents or those that would be considered more, ocean, deep ocean environmental kind of concerns about, hey, we really don't want you doing this because of how it upsets the ocean environment?
Thanks, Charlie, for that question. I don't think that we've received so much of that. I think it's because we followed the recipe book laid out for us by the environmental community and the regulators, the state regulators, that we've made sure that we've made the proper decisions, especially with the slant wells. And I've touched on how blessed we are with the geology that we have down here, and that's others intake methods are not something that we're judging, because we happen to have really good geology and slant wells work, and other intake technologies may work in other areas. So from that perspective, we've been okay in terms of the feedback that we received on the deep ocean environment. I did want to touch real quick, Charlie, on the metropolitan discussion and the wider use of that. I wanted to give you the retail perspective of that. And at the 5 million gallon per day level, we can use that water. Our neighbors can use that water. But we've also entered into a programmatic EIR to potentially develop a 15 million gallon per day project at our site. And the 11 acres is definitely robust enough to do so. And that wouldn't be for us. And our board has made it very clear. That's for a wholesaler. That's for a JPA. And we definitely want more of a regional impact, a regional benefit from that larger project. And oh, by the way, there's also the opportunity to use another 5 MGD for a potential DPR project there. So we've actually completed a conceptual study for that. So that's how we're looking to hopefully parlay this into a regional beneficial project there. Thank you.
Okay. Well, and again, your location, just because as the other great landmark that everybody sort of talked about for a long time now closed, was that San Onofre nuclear generating station. I remember for years and years and years, people would say, well, the best place to ever do a heat exchange and desalt water would be at San Onofre. And then you had to quickly point out, it's like, well, I want to be the PR guy that then sell drinking water that's come from a nuclear power plant site. that was a little technologically, you could do it. With a public perception, entirely different matter. And so let me ask that question about the public perception. We went through it and is still going through it to some degree, although not nearly what it used to be on recycled water and what it means to recycle water and put it into the drinking water system for direct potable reuse. Do you see, Dave, you sort of talked about it with your community forum. people say, well, why aren't you using the ocean? Do you see any pushback from, hey, how does that work? Is there a public education process we need to go through? Or is it something people just say, hey, you know what? It's there. We just expect you to be doing it. Go figure it out.
I think there's a little of both, Charlie, and I would say it works both ways. We've seen a tremendous change in the way public agencies approach communicating with the public. I think all of us know that our jobs have changed. The expectation of how we justify our projects, explain the need, the purpose, the benefits, it has changed, and so we are doing a much better job as water professionals explaining what we're doing and why we're doing it and why it's important to the people that we serve. At the same time, I think people are becoming more sophisticated in understanding what we do. So it's gone both ways. And we see that in water recycling and potable reuse, where we've seen a dramatic improvement in perception. People get it. They understand, hey, we can do this. We can make this water safe and you can drink it. And I think with seawater desal, it is the same. In the coastal communities, people, the ocean is very important to them, and they want to be sure we protect it, as do all of us. So I think the bar is set high, that we need to demonstrate the need. We need to demonstrate that we can do it and protect marine life, protect our planet, and reduce our carbon footprint and not fuel climate change. But I think we're getting better at explaining that. And, the questions that we're getting about why aren't you doing this are kind of indicating that people are there. People are ready and understand. And, when we go through periods of drought and water scarcity, people begin to realize how important it is to do these things. And so I think people are willing to really understand better than they probably had 10, 20 years ago, understand why we need to invest in sort of a portfolio approach, and that seawater desalination would have a place in that.
Dan, I know that when you guys finally kind of crossed that threshold, it had become a very intense debate at the time your board finally voted, and then you put up the Carlsbad plant. Did the public and those that were critics since operation began, has that diminished? Has that changed? Do they now have a different understanding? Or is that something that we can learn from for the rest of us as we go forward with other projects?
Well, I think there's nothing like a good drought to make everyone value or understand the value of water, and in this case, seawater desal. I think the San Diego community has been well informed over the years on and supportive, I think, in general, of seawater desal. In 2001, there was a Public Policy Institute of California survey, and it found that, and this is to the point that we're all making here, there was a 68% approval rating to build more desal plants in California. In terms of getting the plant off the ground, I really have to hand it to Poseidon in the early years, because as the project developer, they were ingrained in everything that we were doing at the Water Authority. They were out in the community with us, and I think that as much as the political will of our board and the willingness to pay of our ratepayers is what got us past the finish line with the Carlsbad plant.
Well, Joe, I'm going to ask you, from a public policy standpoint, each of you have sort of talked about it a little bit, but it's one thing to sort of plan and sequentially go down the path and try to work with the existing regulations, massage regulations, sort of get public approval to do kind of these things. Dan said it, it takes sometimes a good drought sort of brings people's attention to everything. Is it really kind of like that, almost like when we had the earthquake, a freeway falls down, we will not hesitate to marshal absolutely every resource to, come in to get things up and get things running again. Is it the same kind of thing with desalination, or do we really have the leeway and I'll call it landing space, sort of come in and do things and convince and sort of bring things along? Or do we kind of need that cataclysmic event sort of give somebody a push to get it finally, I'll call it, say, the pig through the snake?
So great question, Charlie. So this past year, we all experienced the whiplash change between record drought conditions to record snowpack conditions. And I think the reality has set in for all of us that we're just going to be operating in extremes, in extreme conditions, whether it's extreme drought, prolonged drought, or extreme wet weather. And I think the public, to Dave's point, I think the public is very sophisticated, and they're following the evolution of climate change. I think all of us probably get more questions from our neighbors and from our friends as far as what's going on than I've ever gotten over my 30 years in the water industry. So the public has become very sophisticated. The conditions have changed. And I think ocean desal has to be part of that portfolio of solutions that we got to continue to invest in, that we got to continue to advocate for. And whether it's smaller scale facilities or larger scale facilities, I think it's absolutely part of our ability as a region to continue to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and frankly, to continue to be able to secure sufficient water to meet the needs of our, especially in Riverside, the growing community that we're seeing out here.
So that's good in the public perception process, but as we all know, these things don't come for free. Whether you're talking about recycling, desal, even if we were to go and, as we've talked about, fixing existing infrastructure like the Bay Delta. So, Rick, where have you gone? What kind of success have you had, and how important is it to piece together funding approaches that help mitigate some of those rate offsets? Or is this something we sort of need to also prepare the public to say, hey, you know what? There is no more free or abundantly near free water. It's just going to cost more. And so we got to build that into our modeling going forward.
Thanks, Charlie. I'll back up to 2019. Our EIR was approved in 2019. As we were June of 2019, 9 months later, the pandemic hits us, and our board had to do a gut check. And so we did it right during the pandemic and did a customer survey. And we found out the same type of favor ratings, between 70 and 80% still in favor of desal, even during this pandemic and the economic uncertainty. So that pushed us forward, and we started getting very aggressive on pursuing grant funding. Currently, we have $32.4 million in federal and state grant funding. We're in the process of applying for additional federal funding. Hopefully very soon we'll be at the $40 million mark, and we'll be chasing additional funding as well. One of the legislative fixes we needed to go through several years ago was State Assembly Bill 1752, authored by Petrie, Norris, and Bro, that allowed us to deliver this project as a design, build, operate, while still maintaining state Prop 1 and state SRF funding. So that was successful. That kind of cleared the way for a design, build, operate, maintain approach. The other funding mechanisms we've been approved or shortlisted, I should say, for WIFIA funding. We're in the process of applying for the drinking water, SRF, and the Metropolitan Local Resources Funding Program is in process, and that's very significant as well. Thanks, Charlie.
So, David, how about you? Yours is a pilot project. Is it who's funding the pilot? And then I assume once it all sort of plays out, you'll have a better idea of what it would take to commercialize and put it on a grander scale.
Right. So the funding is interesting there is some R&D that is happening, research and development. And the model that we are pursuing is that, it's a partnership with a private company, Ocean Well. Ocean Well is bringing private capital to fund all of the R&D. And we felt like that was appropriate. Our role as a public agency partner is to provide in-kind support and also to help in securing grant monies. And as Rick mentioned, there is a tremendous amount of grant money right now. We're probably in the best environment for state and federal funding I've ever seen in my career. With the Inflation Reduction Act on the federal level, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then, on our state level, we're looking at a resources bond potentially next year. So things are good in terms of funding. And if you can fit your project into the lens of water supply development, diversification, and climate adaptation, you're well suited to get that funding. So we're working on that. The Bureau of Reclamation has a program called Pitch to Pilot, which is a good fit for a project like the partnership that I described. So we'll be looking at that. And then what we're looking at is what we call a line of sight to commercialization. As a private company, Ocean Well, they need to see that there's an opportunity in the future for a commercial project. And that's really what they're looking at, is this future line of sight for a potential commercial project that would involve additional partners. It would not just be Las Virgenes. It would be Las Virgenes plus, 4, 5, 6, 10 additional agencies that would be partners and receive that water.
Somehow I just had this terrible mental image of, each of those 10, funding sponsors, with their own commercialized pod sitting on the bottom of the ocean. As you describe the technology. Dan, I know that money is never an object in San Diego, but again, this, the benefit of being the lead agency and kind of being out there on the front end of this thing, how did you piece together the financial wherewithal to make Poseidon, the plant, happen? And then sort of what do you see now that you're up and operating, and how we then prepare customers for sort of how that gets integrated into the rest of the portfolio?
Yeah, well, the Carlsbad plant, it did not receive any significant outside funding. Everything that is being paid for is paid for by our ratepayers. We developed the project through a public-private partnership, and just to get to the bottom line here, the plant cost $1 billion to build, and that was funded by Poseidon, and we have a water purchase agreement. The result of that water purchase agreement is that we pay a little over $3,000 an acre foot for water. And, kind of like what I was saying earlier about all the cheap water being gone, I think that that's sort of cost competitive with a lot of what we see in the reuse arenas. One challenge that we have faced is, and this was brought up earlier, is the ability to obtain federal funding. At least early on, when we looked at how to fund this project, it was viewed that any sort of federal funding would be going to the private sector, right, to the P3 developing the project, when in fact the benefit, which is what we argued, was for the ratepayers. So that has always been very difficult for us. Dave mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act funding. In fact, the Water Authority submitted an application for the Carlsbad plant for expansion of the plant just about a month ago. When we built the plant, we knew that we had the ability with the footprint to expand it by about 6,000 acre feet, and so we have that application in to the federal government to expand, or at least pay for the capital component of the plant. I think taking that a step further, at least what we had said, and this gets into some discussions that we had earlier about exchanges and whatnot, we would very much like to partner with folks, whether that's in Southern California, Northern California, Arizona, or Nevada. I think through paper exchanges, there really are no limits to what can be done. In the lower basin, Arizona is looking at desal off the Sonoran coast in Mexico, and an extensive pipeline to connect into Phoenix. Well, maybe perhaps an exchange with the Water Authority, for instance, for some portion of the desal plant or expansion of that 6,000 might be a better thing to pursue. So we are looking at things like that the same way that Metropolitan is with the Southern Nevada Water Authority and Pure Water. So I think that what I'm getting at here is being able to offload some of these supplies, at least for the San Diego County Water Authority, if the demands are there, if the timing is right, to be able to share this facility that we have built, that we have sort of gone through all of the growing pains with, I think is exciting for the future.
Joe, I'm going to have you wrap on the financial piece of it, because water's abundant and near free in the Inland Empire. You just pull it out of the ground and you run it through a couple of things, and it's just easy peasy, right? Where does this all fit in the matrix of all the different options you have in meeting your future customer load?
I wish it was that simple, Charlie, but nothing is anymore. So, what we've done, frankly, over decades is build partnerships. We have a key partner in our desalination program in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So back in 2000, there was a Water Resource Development Act enacted in Congress, essentially, that authorized us initially $25 million. And over the years, we've increased that authorization to 50. In fact, we've exhausted that $50 million through annual appropriations from Congress. But you couple that with other partnerships, including the partnerships with the Metropolitan Local Resource Program, as well as the State Water Resource Control Board that provided us with $22.5 million for the Paris 2 desalter. And you start to build this advocacy for the programs that aligns very much with the partners' priorities and values. And then we can deliver these types of very costly solutions at a reasonable cost to our ratepayers. And frankly, it takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of advocacy locally, statewide, back in DC. But ultimately, I strongly believe it's through building these partnerships that we're able to mitigate the cost impact to our ratepayers.
Well, what I'm getting from all of you is, while somebody may say, hey, it's super simple, just go to the coast and pull some water out of the ocean, it really depends. It depends on where you are, depends on the individual region, the hydrology, opportunities, because it really, as you've described, it can be all over the map. And it really takes a good, hard look at what is your respective agency's needs, your customers' needs, and then designing a program that meets those specific needs, and then finding a way to plug it into the larger whole. So let me leave you with this, and just sort of as we go through it, because clearly you guys know, and you're part of the Southern California Water Coalition, but if you're going to look at desal, and you've all said that desal has a role in the future portfolio, what would groups like the coalition do to assist you? Are there other community partners? Are there others that we should be bringing to the table? How do we expand the conversation so that we can show both the complexities as well as the opportunity? And I'm going to kind of go down the line as I see it. Rick, you want to sort of start with that, and we'll kind of work our way down to Joe?
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. I'll mention reaching out to those who have been opposed to desal in the past. For example, we've reached out to the Sierra Club, and they spoke at the Coastal Commission. And I always say that every type of feedback leads to a better solution. And so any type of outreach and conversation that we could have, that we could reach a happy medium ground, has and continue to help us out in the future. Thanks.
Dave, how about you? You seem to be involved in most every organization in the state on some kind of water piece. Where do you see the coalition and public education and the kind of role that we can play being helpful? And who do we need to be bringing to the table?
So I agree with Rick. I think reaching out to those who have had concerns with seawater desal, but I think also we need our state policymakers to really take to heart what the governor said in his plan. The governor made a strong statement in his water supply plan about the role of ocean desal in California's water supply portfolio. And we really need our state policymakers to really think about how to make that happen. I think more work is needed on that siting and streamlining analysis. It fell short, I believe, of what was intended to really outline a path forward that will help facilitate these kinds of projects in the future. So I think we need to partner with those state agencies, and it's not just the State Water Board, it's also the Coastal Commission and others, ensuring that the ocean plan reflects opportunity for this. And then I think continue to make a better mousetrap. We need to look at what are the challenges and concerns with seawater desalination and improve upon them. Rick has done that and shown that it's successful, and I think we can build on that elsewhere and make these projects better and more environmentally friendly.
Yep. Dan, lessons learned? What kind of things should we be doing differently, be doing better, be doing, kind of bring people along?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to continue to highlight the success stories of seawater desal and brackish water desal, all desal. I think that I view it as one Going forward, I think that relationships, as Joe mentioned, they are important. Strategic partnerships with agencies that are not connected to the coast are important. And let's not forget about the massive amount of plumbing that we have in Southern California. We have the ability to share water. The water that we have in San Diego through the desal plant, there's no reason that through a paper transaction that cannot be virtually shared with our neighbors north of us. So I think that going forward, that kind of partnership activity is where I would hope to see things go.
And Joe, you get the last word. Inland Empire again, you've got the big growth area. What kind of work can we help you with? What kind of things should we be doing as a greater public to help drive this conversation forward?
Well, I echo all the comments made. I think education and advocacy is a critical part of the path forward. Dave mentioned advocacy at the state level. I would also say at the federal level. I think we're all concerned about the long-term conditions on the Colorado River, and frankly, the federal government is concerned about what can we do on a collective level in not only Southern California but the entire Western region. So I think looking at ocean desal, large-scale ocean desal, can be part of that solution for the Western U.S. in terms of reducing our demands on the Colorado River. I think it's that type of advocacy and that type of education, both regional, statewide, and federal, that I think is going to help us move forward.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you all. This has been sort of lit this up to begin with. It's very enlightening, but I think what I'm taking away from this is not easy. This is a lot of work. It's got to be very specific work. There's a lot of engagement that goes on, and really it's up to our public to also kind of come along and understand where the opportunities are and not just take some tagline from a political advocacy group, either positive or negatively, right? You need to really understand where your water's coming from, how you play in all of it, and that the desalination does have a part of our future. It's not a silver bullet. Nobody's claiming that it is, but it certainly may be part of the portfolio as outlined by the state. And we need to make sure that we are weighing appropriately all the considerations so that regulators, state legislators can make informed decisions as we go forward. I want to thank all four of you for being with us on What Matters. Stick with us. I'm going to come back to some closing thoughts here in just a minute. Well, thanks for joining us on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast. If you like today's discussion, go to wherever you download your podcasts and give us that 5-star rating. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. That'll help us build our presence in this new world and on this new format. And if you're interested in helping sponsor this program, please reach out to us at socalwater.org and send us a message. Now, as we close today's show, I leave you with this challenge. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of the solution. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we educate to advocate. So as public policy leaders have difficult choices, together we help them make informed decisions. Well, thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next time here on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast.